It was late, and everyone had left the cafe except an old man who sat in the shadow the leaves of the tree made against the electric light. In the daytime, the street was dusty, but at night the dew settled the dust, and the old man liked to sit late because he was deaf, and now at night it was quiet, and he felt the difference. The two waiters inside the cafe knew that the old man was a little drunk, and while he was a good client, they knew that if he became too drunk, he would leave without paying. So they kept watch on him. That's the beginning of A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, one of the most enigmatic and weirdly beautiful of Hemingway's short stories. He was at the peak of his powers in his early days. This is published, I think, in the early 30s, and he was well established, and he had really concretized his style at this point. And before it became a kind of parody of itself, he was still in full control of it. And this story brings out so much of that. A lot of people make a big deal about the iceberg theory, saying, well, he popularized this or something like that. It had been around more or less for centuries, but if not millennia. But here you see him practicing this where it is so enigmatic. There are so few answers available within this story. You're not quite sure what's going on, and you're just sort of experiencing it as it comes along, line by line. The essence of the iceberg theory, of course, is you can see only the very surface of it, but the bulk of it, all of the heft, is in fact below the surface, and just seeing that little bit up top gives you an idea of what's beneath, even though you cannot see it. And this story does that. You have no idea really what's going on, but everything is hinted at, everything is nuance, everything is mood, and that creates a kind of aesthetic feeling that is undeniably powerful. It is a weird little story. The setup is that this old man is sitting there in this bar in early 20th century Spain, and it is getting late, and there are two waiters who are sitting around like, okay, watching the clock. He's the last guy in here. We got to get him out so we can go home. Waiters are waiters. That's their interest. But at the same time, you get this implication in there that they're doing more than that. It says explicitly that they're concerned that he's going to get too drunk, and then he'll leave without paying, and so they don't want that. But the way that the paragraph ends on that, so they kept watch on him. That is a weirdly enigmatic phrase. They kept watch on him. Now, perhaps they are watching to see, out of a kind of suspicion, okay, is he going to screw us? Is he going to get up and leave without paying? But there is that suggestion again in the moodiness of it, in the very bare minimalist language. There are very few words for such a evocative scene. There is a sense that while they're keeping watch for him also, not just on him, they seem to be watching over him, almost guarding him. Perhaps they are guardian angels. And as the dialogue starts to kick in, you get a portrait of these two waiters. One is relatively young, the other is a little bit more experienced, perhaps the classical Hemingway man of experience. And they each have distinct perceptions on this old man, and the young one seems a little bit more impatient. The old one seems a little bit more indulgent. There's discussion about how, one of them says right after that thing, one waiter said last week he tried to commit suicide. So there's a sense of, there's something very dark going on here. And it doesn't say which waiter says this. We're not given any names. It's all very unclear. But the prevailing sense is, well, okay, they're sitting there and they're watching this old guy and they're wondering what's going on in his head. Is he drunk? Is he just drunk enough? Is he is he contemplating suicide? Is he going to do it here? Is he going to do it tonight? If we give him more to drink, is he going to be out of it enough that he goes and he tries it again, or is he going to be out of it enough that he doesn't, that he just goes home and goes to sleep? All of these possibilities are swirling around there in this very simple conversation that has a really dark undercurrent. Last week he tried to commit suicide, one waiter said. Why? He was in despair. What about? Nothing. Nothing. In despair about nothing. Now, again, just a simple line. We're not even told who says it necessarily. But in despair about nothing. Well, is nothing a something there? Does nothing have a kind of substance to it? The existentialists of the era would say that, well, yes, nothingness is a thing. But here, or is it a dismissive, like, yeah, he was in despair, who cares? It's nothing, not a big deal. There's such suggestion weighted into every little item, and it's a very short story. You can read it in like 5 minutes, but there's such a mood to it that it hints at so much just underneath that can be easily dismissed as, well, nothing. This is just a story about an old guy who maybe drinks too much and he's a little depressed, and the waiters who have to sit there and watch him. And the waiters have a little conversation, and the story's over. And when you first read it, it's like, what? What happened there? What's the point? You're only seeing the surface. You're only seeing the very, very tip of the iceberg. Everything else is happening underneath, and it hints at that with little enigmatic phrases and just the spareness of the language. They sat together at a table that was close against the wall near the door of the café, and looked at the terrace where the tables were all empty, where the old man sat in the shadow of the leaves of the tree that moved slightly in the wind. Just taking note, just saying, well, that's what that is over there. And even the bit about the shadow is repeated, so it seems kind of banal. But why the repetition? Well, why do you want to emphasize a shadow? Well, the story is called A Clean, Well-Lighted Place. By this time you have gotten to that word shadow, which is now printed twice in this, in the very first few words of the story. We're saying, well, I thought this was about well lighted, and now this focus on the shadow, just dropping that in, not particularly heavily, just mentioning it. The shadow is there. There is always a shadow, and the conversation between the two waiters gets around to that as they're sitting there debating, well, is he drunk or not? What should we do? Um, the older waiter sort of chides the younger waiters, well, you have youth and confidence, you have everything. I have nothing but work. Again, the Hemingway kind of icon is somebody who is a little bit broken, a little bit emotionally, not fragile, but wounded, but still goes on and does his work. That's Hemingway all the way through. But that focus on shadow and light plays out. It is very late, and this one cafe is apparently quite nice. It is clean and it is well lighted. And the older waiter tries to explain to the younger one that, well, There's something nice about that. There's something essential about that. Because the younger one says, why doesn't he just leave? There are other bars. You can go somewhere, a bodega after hours, a little dive somewhere. And the older one says, no, 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 no. It's not the same. Um, it's dark. It's noisy. It's dirty. A clean, well-lighted place is someplace where you can have some dignity, someplace where you can have a moment of repose and enjoyment. Perhaps you're afraid of the dark. There is that suggestion throughout. The dark is something that is always lurking out there, and sitting in a clean, well-lighted place can keep it at bay for at least a little while. Maybe you have to go back home eventually to a lonely, dark place, perhaps. But the ability to sit and appreciate that, okay, for right now, the shadows are at bay. That's the goal. That's the focus. And as they're talking, and you get these long stretches of conversation that go by, and it's very difficult to tell who is speaking, is the younger one or the older one. Again, we're given no names, and a lot of the exchanges, including the very longest one, don't even have speech tags on it. So you don't know who is speaking, and you're just hearing or seeing, reading these lines of dialogue just sort of drift out through the ether, and they're completely untethered. They have no grounding in context or dialogue. So it becomes somewhat otherworldly, somewhat bizarre, somewhat inconsequential. And it almost puts you in the perspective of an old man who's sitting there and can hear people talking in the background, but doesn't really pay attention. It's just words that are drifting out there, and he is just sitting there trying to focus on being in the light. And the words don't matter so much. The words are almost irrelevant. And there's an awful lot to unpack there, of course, as well. The waiters, they get him out, and they start to pack up. They're cleaning up, and the older one sort of dismisses the younger one. Good night, said the younger waiter. Good night, the other said. The other is an interesting, he is the other. Again, very simple word choice, very simple, well, I could just write, well, the older waiter. Or I could give him a name, Chuck. But calling him the other there estranges him just all the more, makes him seem outside of the experience, makes him seem unfamiliar or uncanny, as Freud might say. Turning off the electric light, he continued the conversation with himself. The electric light is dwelled upon a couple of times. It was in the very beginning. The electric light, as if there is a kind of falseness to it, or there is a kind of specificity to it. Perhaps it is also that it is vulnerable, or it is a different kind of light. What is the kind of light that is not an electric light? Well, okay, daylight perhaps, but it's night. What is the focus of light that this story is dealing with? Well, I would say it's a kind of emotional light, or existential light, a kind of non-darkness that they're able to dwell in. It is certainly a representative and symbolic light, and not just a light switch. Turning off the electric light, he continued the conversation with himself. It is the light, of course, but it is necessary that the place be clean and pleasant. You do not want music. Certainly you do not want music. Nor can you stand before a bar with dignity, although that is all that is provided for at these hours. What did he fear? It was not fear or dread. It was nothing that he knew too well. It was all a nothing, and a man was nothing too. It was only that and light and all it needed, and a certain cleanliness a certain cleanness and order. Some lived in it and never felt it, but he knew it all was nada, y pues nada, y nada, y pues nada. Our nada, who art in nada, nada be thy name. Thy kingdom nada, thy will be nada, in nada as it is in nada. Give us this nada, our daily nada, and nada us our nada, as we nada our nadas, and nada us not into nada, but deliver us from nada, pues nada. Hail nothing, full of nothing, nothing is with thee. He smiled and stood before a bar with a shining steam pressure coffee machine. Very famous little stretch there. So you're going inside this man's mind. This is a little stream of consciousness moment, and he is sort of jokingly repeating the Lord's Prayer, infusing it with nothing. Again, that word, nada. A bleak existential philosophy infused with a kind of inbred, or not inbred, but a kind of baseline Catholicism that this older man is confronting is inadequate in the world. It means nothing. So he is worshiping nothing. He is believing in nothing. And again, is that nothing a something? Is it a substance in itself? This is that wrestles this into a new philosophical discussion of existentialism. But as he's dwelling on that, these words are just sort of tumbling to him. And you think about the flow of this. He's just sort of playing with words, playing with language, almost toying with them. You know, it's kind of hokey and cheesy to take the Lord's Prayer and start to make it into something a little bit silly. And it has that sing-songy voice as they're evoking the King James Bible with this new kind of farcical element. But it does come at a bit of a contrast between this dreamy little nothing that does come in a bit of a contrast to the much more sharp, angular conversation that you had, the dialogue conversation that you had. Now he is expressly said to be in conversation with himself, and the words come very smoothly. They're kind of nonsense, but they come smoothly, versus the other words were very sharp. When he's in conversation with the other waiter, it's very sharp, it's very angular, it is very tight. Here, there's nothing tight. It's all just a flow. Which world would he rather be in, though? But when he's in that world, he's all alone. He's talking to himself. And you suddenly realize that at the very end, he smiled and stood before a bar with a steaming pressure coffee machine. So he has found himself a little late night cafe, a coffee bar. You didn't realize that he was moving because we last left. He was still closing up his place. This is a new place. What's yours? Asked the barman. Nada. He's just sort of dwelling on that, but the barman doesn't, the bartender doesn't want any part of that. He's not going to play along. There is a wall between this older waiter and the bartender. So the bartender just turns away, saying "otro loco más," another crazy one. He can't find communion. He can't find someone to share the night with. He can find a little patch of light somewhere for a little while, but at home, you figure he's facing the same fate as that old man. The old man who is going to go home to his dark, lonely place and perhaps kill himself again, or try to not kill himself again. but maybe the waiter is in the exact same place. And maybe you get the sense that the waiter was sitting there looking at that old guy and thinking, yeah, that's me. That's where I am. If he wasn't working and didn't have this awkward professional relationship with this other waiter, he would be completely alone. A little cup, said the waiter. The barman poured it for him. The light is very bright and pleasant, but the bar is unpolished, the waiter said. It's a little dingy, okay, the light's good, but, it's just a little shabby. Something's ugly there that he notices. The barman looked at him but did not answer. It was too late at night for conversation. You want another copita? The barman asks. No, thank you, said the waiter and went out. He disliked bars and bodegas. A clean, well-lighted café was a different thing. Now, without thinking further, he would go home to his room. He would lie in the bed, and finally, with daylight, he would go to sleep. After all, he said to himself, it is probably only insomnia. Many must have it. Maybe it is insomnia. But there you get the admission that, yeah, he is going home to the same lonely place as the old man. Many must have it. Well, the old man has it. He has it. How many others? How many others carry that darkness? He can only fall asleep in the light. He can only rest when it's light, in daylight. Now, that's what waiters tend to do. They tend to work very late hours, but maybe it's more than that. Maybe the darkness just terrifies him because he sees it all around him. And when he's alone in his little apartment somewhere, it's hard to deal with. The darkness closes in. The darkness makes life itself, existence, a burden. And he gets up every day. He recognizes the work. He's not enjoying it. He is not a happy man. But he does his job. He shows up every day. So there you get the Hemingway hero. Somebody who is battling demons on a moment by moment basis, but never lets it show.